Elon Musk gets 24 hours. You get 24 hours. The difference is not the hours. It is the ownership. Right now, someone with the same education, the same city, the same number of hours in a day is building something that will outlast them. And you are here, reacting, checking, scrolling, waiting for motivation to arrive like a bus you did not schedule. This audiobook is not about productivity hacks. It is not about waking up at 5 a.m. and pretending that fixes something. It is about one brutal truth: you do not own your time. Not yet. By the end of this, you will. Not because you got inspired. Because you finally understood how time actually works, and what it costs you every single day to misuse it. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Being Busy. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with hard work. It is the exhaustion of a person who moved all day and built nothing, who checked everything and advanced nothing, who was, by every visible measure, busy, and who, at the end of that day, cannot name a single thing that actually moved forward. That person is not lazy. That person is trapped. And the trap is not in their schedule. It is in their identity. This is where we begin. Most people have been taught that busyness is a virtue, that a packed calendar is evidence of importance, that the person with the most meetings, the most notifications, the most to do is somehow winning. The culture rewards the performance of effort. It applauds the appearance of work. And so people slowly, without realizing it, learn to fill every hour. Not because the hours needed to be filled, but because an empty hour felt like failure. The truth is, busyness is not ambition. Busyness is fear wearing ambition's clothes. When there is no silence, there is no accountability. When every moment is occupied, no one, not even you, can stop long enough to ask whether any of it mattered. Busyness is the most socially acceptable way to avoid that question. And most people spend entire careers, entire decades, avoiding it. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. Let that land. Because it is not a motivational phrase. It is a diagnosis. Think about yesterday. Not your best day, not your worst. Just yesterday. How many hours do you actually remember choosing? Not reacting to an email someone else sent. Not attending a meeting someone else called. Not scrolling because the silence got uncomfortable. How many hours were yours, by design, before anyone else touched them? For most people, the answer is uncomfortable. Most people react. You choose. That is the entire gap between a person who owns their day and a person who survives it. Now, here is the argument that most people refuse to sit with. Unexamined effort compounds. Not into success. Into wasted years. A person who works hard in the wrong direction does not get partial credit. They get further from where they are trying to go, and they arrive there tired. The effort was real. The exhaustion is real. But the outcome does not care about the effort. The outcome only cares about the direction. The brain is not neutral in this. The brain actively works against you here. It has a mechanism, one that manufactures urgency out of nothing, that assigns feelings of importance to tasks that carry zero strategic weight. Responding to a message feels pressing. Reorganizing a folder feels productive. Checking a notification feels necessary. None of these are lies the brain tells maliciously. They are simply the brain doing what it is built to do: keep you responding, keep you stimulated, keep you moving. The truth is, the brain cannot distinguish between motion and progress. You have to make that distinction yourself. And most people never do. This is where most people stop. Not because the information is wrong. Because accepting it requires them to look at their own days honestly, and honesty has a cost. It costs the story its comfort. The story where they were busy because the work demanded it. Where the hours disappeared because life is just like that. Where the exhaustion at the end of the day is at least proof of something. It is not proof of progress. It is proof of activity. And those two things are not the same. So here is the only exercise in this chapter, and it is not complicated. Write down every hour of yesterday. Every single one. Then go through that list and mark each hour with one of two labels. Chosen or inherited. Chosen means you decided in advance that this was how that hour would be used. Inherited means it arrived from someone else's urgency, someone else's request, someone else's timeline, and you simply responded. Do not judge the list. Not yet. Just see it. Most people who do this exercise for the first time look at that page and go quiet. Because the chosen hours are few, and the inherited hours are most of the day. Not because someone stole their time. Because they never claimed it in the first place. You cannot fix what you will not see. That is not a philosophy. That is a practical law. Visibility comes before ownership. Always. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And you have been loud long enough to know it has not been working. The first step is not a new schedule. It is not a new habit. It is the willingness to look at the day as it actually is, not as it felt while you were in it. That willingness is rarer than talent. It is rarer than intelligence. And it is the only foundation on which everything else in this audiobook can be built. You now see the illusion. Which means you are ready for the harder question. Not what you did with your time, but whether you even know how much of it was yours to begin with. Chapter 2. You do not have a time problem. The list is in front of you now. Yesterday, written out. Hour by hour. And if you did the work from the last chapter, something shifted. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way a room changes when the lights come on, and you see it as it actually is, not as you assumed it was in the dark. What you are looking at is not a time problem. It never was. Say that again slowly to yourself. Not a time problem. Because the moment you accept that framing, the moment you decide that you are simply short on hours, you hand the entire conversation to something outside your control. And a person who believes their problem is outside their control will never solve it. They will only complain about it with increasing sophistication. The truth is, you have time. The evidence is in the list. The hours are there. They always were. What is missing is not the hours. What is missing is the clarity to decide what those hours are for before someone else decides for them. Unclear people are always short on time. Clear people always find it. That is not optimism. That is a mechanical observation. When you do not have a defined target, every request that arrives feels potentially relevant. Every meeting invitation carries the possibility that this one might matter. Every task on the pile feels like it might be the one that counts. So you take it all. You carry it all. And at the end of the day, you are buried under the weight of other people's priorities, and you call it a full schedule. It is not a full schedule. It is an undefended one. Most people react. You choose. And choosing begins with one thing only. A clear answer to a question most people spend their entire careers avoiding. What are you actually trying to build? Not broadly. Not vaguely. Not success or a better life. Precisely. Specifically. With enough detail that you could look at any given task and ask, does this move that thing forward, or does it not? Without that answer, everything feels important. With it, almost nothing is. This is where most people stop. Because clarity is not comfortable. Clarity means commitment, and commitment means that if you fail, you cannot blame the ambiguity of your goals. You cannot say you were going in many directions at once. You said where you were going. And you either got there or you did not. That accountability is what most people avoid when they say they do not know what they want. The truth is they know. They are afraid to write it down. Here is what uncertainty costs you in real, measurable hours. Every morning you wake up without a defined priority. Your first decision of the day is made reactively. You open your phone, your inbox, your messages, and you let the loudest thing in front of you become your first task. That task connects to another reactive task, which connects to another. And by the time you surface from the reactive sequence, 2, 3, or 4 hours are gone. Not stolen. Surrendered. Willingly. Because there was no prior claim on them. A person with clarity wakes up, and the first hour is already spoken for. Not because they are more disciplined by nature. Because they made the decision the night before, in a quiet moment, before the noise had any power. The hour was claimed before it could be taken. Now consider the person you are trying to become. Not in abstract terms. The actual version of you that you picture when you allow yourself to think about it honestly. That person has a schedule. They do not float through the day hoping the right things happen to them. They have a structure that reflects their priorities, not other people's urgency. They protect certain hours. They refuse certain requests. They move in a direction because the direction was chosen, not inherited. That person is not a different human being. They are you, operating from clarity instead of noise. Most people react. You choose. And the choice starts with a definition so precise that it filters every decision that follows. Here is what this chapter asks of you. Not a full plan. Not a life audit. One sentence. Write the single most important thing you are trying to build in the next 12 months. Not 5 things. 1. The one that, if it happened, would make the rest feel secondary. Write it clearly enough that a stranger could read it and know exactly what you mean. Then look at yesterday's list again. The hours, chosen and inherited. Ask how many of those chosen hours, the few that were actually yours, were pointed at that one thing. The truth is, for most people, the answer is very few. And that is not a time problem. That is a clarity problem. Which means it is solvable. Entirely, completely by you. No extra hours required. Clarity is the prerequisite to ownership. You cannot own a direction you have not defined. You cannot protect time you have not assigned a purpose to. And you cannot build something deliberately while moving in every direction at once. You now have the diagnosis. Not a time shortage. A clarity deficit. And you have the first correction. One sentence. One priority. One direction chosen before the noise begins. The question now is not what you are going to do. The question is how you are going to structure the day that executes it. Because clarity without architecture is just intention. And intention, as most people have already learned the hard way, does not build anything on its own. That is what comes next. Chapter 3. The Architecture of an Owned Day. No building was ever constructed by people who showed up and improvised. Not a single one. Before the first brick was placed, before the first beam was raised, someone sat in a quiet room and drew the structure on paper. They decided in advance what went where and why. They accounted for the load. They accounted for pressure. They built the design before they touched the material. Your day is a structure. And right now, most people are trying to build it without a blueprint. You have the clarity from the last chapter. You know what you are building. Now the question shifts from what to how. And the how is not motivational. It is architectural. It is a set of decisions made before the day begins that determine what the day will actually produce. A day does not organize itself. You architect it, or chaos does. There is no third option. The day will be filled, one way or another. The only variable is whether you filled it with intention before it arrived, or are filling it reactively as it passes you. Most people choose the second option without ever realizing they chose anything at all. Here is the structure. Not a suggestion. A framework built on how human cognition actually operates. Every hour of your day belongs to one of 3 categories: deep work, shallow work, and recovery. That is the entire architecture. 3 blocks. Everything fits into one of them, and nothing operates correctly when placed in the wrong one. Deep work is the category most people know the least about and protect the least often. It is the focused, uninterrupted engagement with your highest value task. The work requires your full cognitive presence. The kind of work that, when done well, compounds over time. Writing, building, solving, creating, deciding at the highest level. This is the work that separates the people who grow from the people who maintain. And it requires conditions. It requires protection. It cannot be done in fragments. It cannot survive interruption. It must be scheduled in your sharpest hours and defended against everything else. Most people do their deep work last. After the meetings. After the emails. After the responses and the reactions, and the maintenance tasks have consumed the best hours of the day. They save the most important work for the moment they are most depleted. And then they wonder why the most important work never seems to get done. The truth is, your deep work does not belong at the end of the day. It belongs at the beginning of it, in the hours when your cognitive capacity is at its highest, and the world has not yet made its demands. Most people react. You choose. And in this context, choosing means placing your deep work first, before anything else can displace it. Shallow work is real and necessary. Emails, administrative tasks, scheduling, routine communication, logistical decisions. These things matter. They keep a life functioning. But they do not compound. They do not build. They maintain. And maintenance, by definition, only keeps you where you are. Shallow work belongs in the hours after your peak. The mid-afternoon window, when cognitive sharpness has declined but basic executive function remains. You can still respond, organize, and manage. You cannot, at this point, create at the highest level. So stop trying to. Assign shallow work to shallow hours and stop feeling guilty about it. This is where most people stop. Because the natural response to this framework is, but I do not control my schedule. My meetings are set by others. My inbox demands immediate responses. My manager expects availability. Understood. And partially true. But examine that claim carefully. Because what most people mean when they say they cannot control their schedule is that they have never attempted to. They have accepted the default. They have let the calendar fill in the order that requests arrived, rather than the order that best reflects their actual output. You do not need to control every hour. You need to control the first one. And then the second. Protect those with the seriousness you would give to a meeting with someone whose opinion of you matters enormously. Because that is exactly what it is. It is a meeting with the version of yourself that is trying to build something. Recovery is the third block, and it is the one most people either skip entirely or collapse into without design. Recovery is not the absence of work. It is the deliberate restoration of cognitive and physical capacity to enable future high-level work. Sleep is recovery. A proper meal eaten without a screen is recovery. A walk without a destination or a podcast is recovery. Silence, chosen and protected, is recovery. The truth is, a person who does not schedule recovery is unproductive. They are being reckless. They are borrowing from a biological account that will eventually close. And when it closes, it does not close gently. It closes in the form of chronic fatigue, degraded decision quality, emotional reactivity, and the slow accumulation of hours that produced nothing because the mind operating them had nothing left to give. Every structure has a load limit. Exceed it long enough, and the structure fails. Not as a possibility. As a guarantee. Most people treat recovery as the reward for finishing everything else. High performers treat it as the condition that makes everything else possible. That is not a small distinction. It is the difference between a schedule that sustains and a schedule that consumes. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And the loudest schedules are almost always the ones with no architecture. Every hour crammed against every other hour, no sequence, no priority, no protected blocks, just noise from open to close. You now have the alternative. 3 blocks. Deep work in your sharpest hours. Shallow work in your recovery window. Recovery scheduled with the same seriousness as the work itself. That is the blueprint. It is not complex. Complex is not the goal. Sustainable precision is the goal. Before this chapter closes, one thing must be said directly. Drawing the blueprint is not the same as following it. Knowing the architecture does not mean you will build accordingly. The knowing is the easy part. What comes next is harder. Because the blueprint will be tested immediately. It will be tested by urgency that feels real but is not. By requests that feel important but are not. By the discomfort of a protected hour that the rest of the world wants access to. The next question is not whether you have the structure. You do now. The next question is whether you know when and where your own mind operates at its highest capacity, because without that knowledge, even the best architecture is placed in the wrong order. That is the conversation that cannot wait. Chapter 4. Peak hours are not a preference. They are a law. The blueprint is drawn. The 3 blocks are defined. Deep work, shallow work, recovery. Clean. Logical. Structurally sound. And almost entirely useless if you place the blocks in the wrong order. This is where the architecture becomes biology. And biology does not negotiate. Every human being on this planet operates on a neurological performance curve. It is not a theory. It is not a productivity concept invented by someone selling a course. It is a measurable, documented reality of how the human brain allocates its highest cognitive resources across the hours of a day. There is a window somewhere in your day where your focus is sharpest, your decision quality is highest, and your capacity for complex thought is at its peak. That window is between 2 and 4 hours long. After it closes, it does not reopen. Not through caffeine. Not through effort. Not through willpower. Most people spend that window answering emails. That single sentence explains why intelligent, hard-working people consistently underperform relative to their own potential. Not because they lack capability. Because they are deploying their highest capability at the lowest value moment of the day and saving their highest value work for when there is almost nothing left. Time is equal. Energy is earned. Everyone gets 24 hours. Not everyone gets the same cognitive output from those hours. And the difference is not talent. It is sequencing. It is the deliberate alignment of task difficulty with energy availability. That alignment is a skill. And like all skills, most people never develop it because no one told them it existed. Here is what peak hours actually mean in practice. Peak hours are the window in your day where your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex reasoning, focused attention, and high-quality decision-making, is operating at full capacity. For most people, this window occurs in the first 2 to 4 hours after full wakefulness. Not immediately upon waking. After the brain has fully engaged. Which, for most people, is somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours after rising, depending on chronotype and sleep quality. During this window, the work you produce is disproportionate to the time spent. A problem that takes 3 hours to solve in a depleted state takes 45 minutes in a peak state. A decision that requires 4 rounds of revision when made at low energy is made correctly on the first attempt during peak hours. The output per hour is not comparable. It is not even close. The truth is, 1 peak hour is worth 3 depleted hours. And most people have the ratio completely inverted. Most people react. You choose. And the choice that matters most is the choice you make about what occupies the first serious hours of your day. Before the meetings. Before the inbox. Before the requests arrive and the noise begins. What is in that space? If the answer is reactive tasks, you are spending the highest currency of your day on the lowest value transactions available to you. Now here is the part that requires honesty. Peak hours are not the same for every person. Research on chronotypes confirms that roughly 20% of people are genuine morning types, meaning their peak performance window arrives early. Another 20% are evening types, meaning their sharpest hours come later in the day. The remaining 60% fall somewhere in between. The point is not that you must wake at 5 a.m. The point is that you must know your window and protect it with precision. Most people have never identified their peak window with any seriousness. They know vaguely that they feel better in the morning or sharper at night. But they have not tracked it. They have not tested it. They have not arranged their schedule around it. They have let the window open and close while they were occupied with tasks that could have been done at any other time. This is where most people stop. Because discovering your peak hours and actually protecting them are two completely different commitments. One is self-knowledge. The other is a structural discipline. And structural discipline means saying, clearly and without apology, that these hours are not available. Not for the meeting that could have been an email. Not for the check-in that serves someone else's anxiety. Not for the task that carries zero compounding value. These hours belong to the work that builds. Time is equal. Energy is earned. Consider two people with identical schedules on paper. 8 hours of available work time. Same tasks. Same responsibilities. Same intelligence. Person A does their most cognitively demanding work at the end of the day, after 4 hours of meetings and reactive tasks have depleted their mental reserves. Person B does the same cognitively demanding work in their peak window, before anything else has touched the day. At the end of the week, they have not produced the same output. They cannot have. Because the hours were identical, but the cognitive quality within those hours was entirely different. Person A worked the hours. Person B used them. That is the entire argument. And it is not philosophical. It is physiological. Now there is a practical dimension to this that must be addressed. Identifying your peak hours is only half the equation. The second half is what you do immediately before them. The pre-peak window matters because it either prepares the mind for deep engagement or it contaminates it. A person who spends the 30 minutes before their peak window scrolling through reactive content, absorbing other people's problems, and fragmenting their attention has poisoned the well. The peak window opens, but the mind is already fractured, already responding to 12 different inputs, already behind. The truth is, your peak hours do not begin when you sit down to work. They begin in the window before them. What you do in that prior window is the preparation ritual, whether you have designed it or not. Most people have an unconscious preparation ritual that works against them. They reach for the phone first. They check the messages first. They let the world in first. And by the time they attempt their most important work, they are already operating in reactive mode, which is the exact opposite of the focused singular state that peak work requires. Design the window before the window. Protect the approach to the peak the same way you protect the peak itself. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And there is no louder, more destructive sound than the noise that fills a person's peak hours with work that was never worth those hours in the first place. You now understand the law. Peak hours are not a preference you honor when convenient. They are a biological allocation of your highest capacity, and they will be spent on something. The only question is whether you are the one who decided what that something would be. The architecture is now complete. The blocks are defined. The sequencing is understood. The peak is identified and protected. But a blueprint and a protected schedule mean nothing if the environment around them is designed to destroy them. Because the attacks on your focused hours are not random. They are constant, they are structural, and most of them you invited in yourself. That is the conversation Chapter 5 will not let you sidestep. Chapter 5. What you tolerate, you choose. The peak hours are protected on paper. The architecture is drawn. The sequencing makes sense. And then the day begins. And within the first 20 minutes, the notification arrives. Then the message. Then the quick question that is never quick. Then the interruption dressed as collaboration. And the peak hour, the one that was supposed to belong to the work that matters, is gone. Not stolen. Surrendered. That is not a distraction problem. That is a tolerance problem. And this chapter is going to be direct about it in a way that most conversations about productivity are too polite to be. Every distraction currently operating in your life is there because you allowed it to stay. Every interruption pattern that exists in your day exists because you have not decided against it. Not because you lack the power to. Because you have not yet made the decision. Tolerance is a form of permission. And permission, once given, is taken repeatedly. This is not about blame. It is about mechanics. The environment you operate in will behave according to the rules you enforce. Not the rules you intend to enforce. Not the rules you think about enforcing. The rules you actually, consistently, structurally enforce. And most people have enforced almost none. They have hoped that people would respect their time. They have asked gently for fewer interruptions. They have mentioned, in passing, that they are trying to focus more. None of that is a rule. That is a wish. The truth is, your environment is not neutral. It is actively competing for your attention at every moment of the day. Your phone is designed by teams of engineers whose singular metric is engagement, to pull your focus away from whatever you are doing and back toward the screen. Your notification settings are, by default, configured to interrupt you at maximum frequency. Your open door policy, your immediate response pattern, and your habit of checking messages within seconds of their arrival are not neutral behaviors. They are signals. And the signal they send is, I am available. Always. For anything. At any time. Once that signal is established, it becomes an expectation. And expectations, once established, feel like obligations. Most people react. You choose. But the choice has to be structural. Because willpower against a well-engineered distraction system is not a fair fight. And most people are trying to win that fight with willpower alone. Here is the number that reframes every small interruption. When a person is pulled out of focused work, the average time required to return to the same level of cognitive engagement is 23 minutes. Not 2 minutes. Not 5. 23. Which means a single notification that takes 30 seconds to read and dismiss does not cost 30 seconds. It costs 23 minutes of full focus. A person who experiences 10 such interruptions over the course of a workday does not lose 5 minutes. They lose nearly 4 hours of deep cognitive capacity. Every single day. This is where most people stop. Accepting this number means accepting that their current environment is making them approximately half as effective as they could be. And that is an uncomfortable realization, not because it is hard to understand, but because fixing it requires making decisions that other people will not immediately appreciate. Turning off notifications means some messages will not receive an immediate response. Closing the open door means some colleagues will have to wait. Blocking the first 2 hours of the day for protected deep work means some meetings will need to be rescheduled. These are not dramatic acts. But they feel that way toward people who have been treating availability as a proxy for professionalism throughout their careers. The truth is, immediate availability is not a professional virtue. It is a professional habit. And like all habits, it was formed without a conscious decision and can be replaced with one. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And nothing keeps a person louder than a life with no friction against distraction. When everything is accessible, everything interrupts. When the phone is on the desk, it will be checked. When the inbox is open, it will be read. When the door is open, it will be used. These are not character failures. They are environmental defaults operating exactly as designed. The correction is not discipline. The correction is architecture. This concept is called friction architecture, and it is the most underused tool in time ownership. The principle is simple. Make the behaviors you want to do easy. Make the behaviors you want to stop doing harder. Not impossible. Just harder. Enough friction that the unconscious, automatic reach for the distraction meets a small but sufficient barrier. Phone in another room during peak hours. Not silent on the desk. In another room. Inbox closed, not minimized, during deep work blocks. Calendar blocked, visibly, with a description clear enough that any reasonable person can see the hour is spoken for. These are not dramatic changes. They are environmental decisions that prioritize the path of least resistance over the path of greatest effort. Most people try to resist distraction through repeated acts of conscious willpower. They feel the pull of the phone, and they fight it. They hear the notification, and they resist checking. They sense the urge to switch tasks, and they push it down. This works occasionally. It fails reliably over time. Because willpower is a finite resource that depletes across the day, while the distraction systems around you do not deplete. They are always on. Always optimized. Always ready for the moment your resistance weakens. Structure does not weaken. Structure just runs. Build the structure. Remove the phone from the room. Close the tab. Block the hour. Put the friction between you and the distraction in place before the distraction arrives. Because in the moment it arrives, you are already fighting from a weakened position. The decision needs to be made earlier, in a calm moment, before the pull exists. Tolerance is a form of permission. And you have been permitting too much for too long. Now here is the part that is harder than removing the phone from the room. Some of the distractions in your life are not systems. They are people. Colleagues who interrupt without awareness. Managers who expect immediate responses. Relationships that have been trained by your own prior behavior to expect you to be always available, always responsive, always willing to drop what you are doing. These are not malfunctioning systems. These are people operating on the expectations you established. And resetting those expectations requires a direct, clear, non-apologetic communication of boundaries. Not a long explanation. Not a negotiation. A simple, consistent demonstration that certain hours operate differently now. The truth is, most people will adjust. What they cannot adjust to is ambiguity. If you sometimes respond immediately and sometimes do not, the expectation defaults to immediate. Consistency is the only thing that resets a pattern. And consistency requires that you have actually decided, not that you are trying to. Most people react. You choose. And choice in this context means designing the environment so that the right behavior is the default one. Not the heroic one. The default one. You are no longer asking yourself whether you have the willpower to resist distraction. That is the wrong question. The right question is, have you designed an environment where focus is easier than distraction? If not, the environment will keep winning. Not because you are weak. Because you brought a feeling to a structural fight. The distractions are handled. The environment is architected for focus. The peak hours are protected. And now the conditions exist for real compounding work to happen. But protected time is not the same as used time. And a well-designed schedule full of the wrong commitments is just organized inefficiency. The next conversation is about what actually belongs in those protected hours, and how to know the difference between what deserves your time and what is simply demanding it. Chapter 6. The Art of Saying No at Scale. The hours are protected. The environment is designed. The distractions have been structurally removed. And now, before the first deep work block can even begin, the request arrives. A meeting invitation. A favor. A project that someone needs help with. A commitment that sounds reasonable, sounds manageable, sounds like exactly the kind of thing a capable, collaborative person would agree to. And so, because the habit is old and the discomfort is immediate, you say yes. That yes has a cost. And the cost is not the hour it takes. The cost is the hour it takes, plus the 23 minutes of fragmented attention surrounding it, plus the mental residue it leaves in your protected block, plus the compounding effect of a pattern in which the protected hours are protected in theory but available in practice. One yes to the wrong thing is a no to the right thing. That is not a slogan. It is arithmetic. This chapter is about the skill most high performers list as the one that changed everything. Not a productivity system. not a morning routine. The ability to decline clearly, structurally, and without performing guilt, the requests and commitments that do not belong in their life. Most people cannot do this. Not because they do not want to. Because they have never defined clearly enough what they are saying yes to, and without that definition, every incoming request feels potentially relevant. When the target is vague, every path might lead there. And so every request gets evaluated on its own terms rather than against a clear standard. The truth is, the inability to say no is not a kindness problem. It is a clarity problem. A person who knows precisely what they will build over the next 12 months has a filter. Every request that arrives is evaluated by one question: does this move that specific thing forward or not? That question is not cruel. It is not selfish. It is the only question that allows a person to make decisions based on direction rather than social pressure. Without it, the filter defaults to: does this person seem to need help? Does refusing this make me seem unhelpful? Does this feel like something I should be doing? These are not strategic filters. They are social ones. And social filters produce schedules that serve everyone except the person carrying them. Most people react. You choose. And in the domain of commitments, choosing means applying a deliberate filter before agreeing to anything that will consume protected time. Here is the mechanism by which overcommitment happens, not through dramatic decisions but through accumulated small ones. A 30-minute coffee. A quick review of someone's work. A weekly check-in that was supposed to be temporary. A project that seemed bound and expanded. None of these felt like significant commitments at the moment of agreement. All of them consume hours that were originally designated for something that actually compounds. This is where most people stop. Because the natural response to this argument is, but I cannot just refuse everything. Relationships require investment. Collaboration requires availability. Professional credibility requires responsiveness. All of that is true. And none of it means that every request deserves a yes. The question is never whether relationships and collaboration matter. They do. The question is whether this specific request, at this specific time, from this specific person, serves the work you have decided is most important right now. If it does, say yes completely. If it does not, decline completely. There is no strategically useful middle ground where you say a half yes and spend the next week feeling the drag of a commitment you should not have made. A yes without a strategy is a slow surrender. Now here is the part of this conversation that makes most people uncomfortable. The refusal itself. Because most people, when they do decide to decline, do it in a way that functionally invites negotiation. They apologize. They over-explain. They offer alternatives that are only marginally better for their schedule. They perform regret so thoroughly that the other person leaves the conversation feeling that the no is temporary and worth revisiting. That is not a no. That is a postponed yes wrapped in anxiety. The truth is, a clean refusal requires no extended justification. It requires clarity and consistency. Something as simple as, that does not fit what I am focused on right now. No apology attached. No 3-paragraph explanation of your priorities. No offer of a compromise that costs you equally. A clear statement of non-availability, delivered without aggression and without guilt. The guilt is the part worth examining. Because the guilt is not evidence that the refusal was wrong. The guilt is the emotional residue of a lifetime of being rewarded for availability and implicitly penalized for boundaries. It is a trained response. And like all trained responses, it can be retrained through consistent exposure to a different outcome. What most people discover, once they begin declining with clarity, is that the consequences they feared almost never materialize. The professional relationship does not collapse. The colleague does not resent them permanently. The manager adjusts. Because people do not actually require your constant availability. They require knowing what to expect from you. Consistency is the thing they are actually asking for. And a consistent, clear boundary is far more navigable than an inconsistent, guilt-laden one. Most people react. You choose. And here is the deepest version of that statement in the context of this chapter. Reactive people agree to things because the immediate discomfort of refusal feels larger than the long-term cost of overcommitment. Choosing people understand that the discomfort of refusal is acute and brief. The cost of overcommitment is chronic and compounding. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And nothing makes a schedule louder than the accumulated noise of commitments that were never strategic in the first place. There is one more dimension to this that rarely gets discussed. The commitments that are hardest to decline are not the ones from strangers or casual colleagues. They are the ones from people whose opinion you value. Mentors, senior leaders, close collaborators, people who matter to you professionally or personally. And this is exactly where the clarity of your own direction becomes most important. Because when someone you respect makes a request, the social pull is enormous. The default is to find a way to yes because declining feels like a rejection of the relationship itself. It is not. A relationship strong enough to matter is strong enough to survive a clear, respectful decline. And a relationship that could not survive the occasional no was not a professional relationship. It was a dependency. Those two things require different responses. The truth is, the people who respect you most will respect a clean refusal delivered with clarity. What erodes respect is not the refusal. It is the pattern of agreeing to things and then under-delivering because the agreement was never strategic to begin with. Say less. Commit less. Do what you committed to with everything you have. That is the reputation that compounds. You now have the complete defensive framework. You understand what to protect, how to protect it, and how to decline what does not belong inside it. The environment is structured. The peak hours are guarded. The unnecessary commitments are filtered before they can consume what matters. What remains is the offensive question. Not what to remove from the schedule, but what to place at its center. Not everything belongs in the protected hours. Not everything that matters belongs at the same level. The next conversation is about how to rank, sequence, and execute so that the hours you have protected are producing the work that compounds rather than the work that merely maintains. Chapter 7. Prioritization is not a list. It is a hierarchy. The schedule is defended. The unnecessary commitments have been declined. The protected hours exist, and the environment around them has been structured for focus. Everything that needed to be removed has been removed. And now you are sitting in front of the work. The real work. The work that was supposed to be there all along. And there are 12 things on the list. Not because you failed to filter. Because even after filtering, even after saying no to what does not belong, the remaining legitimate work still exceeds what a single day can hold. And so the question that could not be avoided arrives. When everything that remains feels important, how do you decide what goes first? Most people answer that question with a list. They write down the tasks, sort them by deadline or size, and begin at the top. This feels organized. It feels rational. It feels like a system. It is not a system. It is a flat surface where every item carries the same weight, regardless of its actual value. And a flat surface is the most democratic and the most strategically useless way to organize effort. The truth is, not all important tasks are equal. And treating them as if they are is the source of most of the overwhelm that productive, hard-working people carry. They are doing real work. Legitimate work. Work that genuinely needed to be done. And they are still not moving forward at the rate their effort should produce. Because they are completing tasks without sequencing them. They are checking boxes without asking which box, if left unchecked, would make the others irrelevant. Do the thing that makes all other things easier or unnecessary. That is the entire philosophy of prioritization distilled to a single sentence. And almost no one is actually doing it. Here is the distinction that changes everything. There are two types of important work. Work that is important and linear, meaning it produces a result proportional to the effort invested. And work that is important and compounding, meaning it produces results that multiply over time, that create leverage, that make future work easier, faster, or unnecessary altogether. A to-do list treats both types identically. A hierarchy separates them, placing the compounding work at the top every single time, without exception. Most people react. You choose. And in the domain of prioritization, choosing means identifying, before the day begins, which single action, if completed today, yields disproportionate returns relative to everything else available. Not the most urgent. Not the most visible. The most compounding. Now here is where the familiar framework needs to be pushed beyond its usual limits. The urgent versus important matrix is a useful starting point. It correctly identifies that not all urgent things are important, and not all important things are urgent. But it stops short of the third dimension, the one that actually determines where to place your deepest effort. That third dimension is compounding value over time. A task can be non-urgent, genuinely important, and still carry no compounding effect whatsoever. Updating a document is non-urgent and important. It produces no leverage. Writing the framework that eliminates the need to update the document repeatedly is non-urgent, important, and compounding. These two tasks look similar on a list. In a hierarchy, they are not even in the same category. The compounding filter asks one question of every task. If this gets done exceptionally well today, does it make tomorrow easier, or does it simply close today's loop? Closing loops matters. Maintenance matters. But it belongs lower in the hierarchy. Every day. Without guilt. Doing maintenance before the compounding work is the professional equivalent of organizing your desk before writing the report. It feels productive. It produces nothing that builds. This is where most people stop. Because applying the compounding filter honestly means that several tasks they have been treating as high priority are actually medium or low priority, dressed up as urgent. And reallocating them down the hierarchy means sitting with the discomfort of things left undone while the compounding work is being done first. That discomfort is the price of strategic clarity. And it is a price worth paying every single day. The truth is, most people are completing their days without ever touching the compounding work. Not because they ran out of time. Because they put the compounding work at the bottom of a flat list and filled the hours above it with everything that felt more immediately pressing. By the time those tasks were done, the peak hours were gone, the energy was depleted, and the compounding work was pushed to tomorrow, where it was pushed again and again. This is not a time problem. This is a sequencing problem, and you have the tool to correct it. Here is the practice. Every morning, before anything else is opened, before the inbox is checked, before the day makes its first demand, answer one question in writing. What is the single action I could take today that would produce the most compounding value toward what I am building? Not the most actions. The single one. Write it. Assign it to your peak window. Begin it before anything else has your attention. Complete it, or make significant, measurable progress on it, before the day's reactive demands arrive. That practice, done consistently, is not a productivity trick. It is the mechanism by which people who seem to accomplish enormous things in ordinary time actually do it. They are not smarter. They are not working more hours. They have simply understood that one compounding action executed daily accumulates into outcomes that 100 scattered linear actions cannot match. Most people react. You choose. And the highest form of that choice is choosing, every single morning, to do the thing that builds before you do the thing that maintains. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And the loudest schedules are usually the ones where the compounding work is always waiting, and the maintenance work is always getting done. The hierarchy is not complex. One compounding action at the top. Everything else below it, sequenced by strategic value rather than emotional urgency. That is the entire framework. Now there is a question the framework alone cannot answer. The question of what happens to the quality of your decisions across the hours of the day. Because a perfect hierarchy, placed inside a mind that is cognitively depleted, emotionally reactive, or operating without adequate recovery, does not produce its potential output. The sequencing is correct, but the instrument executing it is compromised. The next chapter is about the instrument, the mind itself. Because time ownership is not only an external discipline, it is an internal one. And the internal discipline is where most people have invested the least. Chapter 8: Mental Fitness is a Time Strategy. The hierarchy is set. The compounding work sits at the top. The peak hours are protected, and the environment is structured. By every external measure, the conditions for high output exist. And then a conversation goes wrong in the morning. Or a decision comes back with unexpected consequences. Or the weight of an unresolved problem that has been sitting at the back of the mind for days finally surfaces. And the protected hour opens. And nothing of quality comes out of it. Not because the system failed. Because the instrument running the system was not ready. This chapter is not about mindfulness as a philosophical concept. It is not about wellness or self-care in the way those words are typically used, softly, gently, without accountability attached. This chapter is about a precise operational truth. The quality of your mental state is a direct multiplier on the quality of every hour you spend. A depleted mind does not produce the same output as a clear one. A reactive mind does not make the same decisions as a composed one. An anxious mind does not solve problems at the same level as a focused one. These are not emotional observations. They are functional ones. And ignoring them while building an otherwise excellent time ownership system is the equivalent of designing a precision instrument and then running it without maintenance until it breaks down. Your mental state is your time multiplier. Everything else you have built in this audiobook runs on top of it. Most people treat mental fitness as a personal development topic. Something separate from performance. Something they will attend to eventually, after the work is done, after the deadline passes, after things settle down. But things do not settle down. And the cost of deferring mental maintenance is not paid in a single dramatic collapse. It is paid in the slow daily degradation of decision quality, focus depth, and emotional stability. All of which consumes time. Enormous amounts of it. The truth is, a single episode of prolonged rumination, the kind where an unresolved problem or conflict loops through the mind for 90 minutes without resolution, does not cost 90 minutes of emotional experience. It costs 90 minutes of output. Everything that was supposed to happen in those 90 minutes did not happen. And everything that follows was processed by a mind that just spent 90 minutes in friction. Multiply that by the number of unresolved anxieties, unaddressed emotional patterns, and habitual reactive responses a person carries, and the time cost of mental neglect becomes staggering. Not in the abstract. In lost hours, degraded work, and decisions made from a compromised position that then required additional hours to correct. Most people react. You choose. And in the domain of mental fitness, that choice means treating the maintenance of your cognitive and emotional state as a non-negotiable operational requirement, not as a luxury for when you have spare time. Here is what mental maintenance actually looks like in the context of time ownership. It is not elaborate. It does not require retreats or extended rituals. It requires consistency with a small number of practices that preserve the quality of the instrument doing the work. Silence is the first practice. Deliberate, chosen, unoccupied silence. Not the silence of a task completed, where you immediately reach for the next input. Silence where the mind is given permission to settle. Most people have no relationship with silence. They fill every available gap with audio, visual stimulation, or social interaction. The mind never gets to process what it has accumulated. It just keeps receiving. And a mind that only receives, that never processes, begins to operate under a growing cognitive load that it cannot name and cannot locate but can absolutely feel in the form of fatigue, irritability, and the inability to focus for extended periods. 10 minutes of deliberate silence is not a spiritual practice. It is a drainage system. It allows the day's accumulated cognitive residue to settle, so the next period of work begins from a cleaner state. Journaling is the second practice, and it is worth being precise about what it is for in this context. Not reflection for its own sake. Not gratitude lists. The specific function relevant here is the externalization of circling thoughts. When a problem, a conflict, or an unresolved decision is living in the mind, it continuously consumes background cognitive resources. It is a process running in the background of the operating system, consuming memory and processing power that should be available for foreground work. Writing it down, precisely and completely, moves it from internal storage to external storage. The mind releases its grip on it. Not because the problem is solved. Because the mind no longer needs to keep holding it in working memory to prevent it from being forgotten. This practice, done consistently, recovers cognitive capacity that most people do not even realize they are losing. The third practice is physical and non-negotiable. The brain is not separate from the body. It is part of it. And a body that is sedentary, chronically underslept, or nutritionally depleted is operating a brain that is measurably slower, less focused, and more emotionally reactive than its rested, physically maintained counterpart. This is not a health conversation. This is a performance conversation. Sleep is the most powerful cognitive recovery tool available. Not 6 hours managed on caffeine. Actual, sufficient sleep. The research is not ambiguous. Cognitive performance, decision quality, emotional regulation, and focus depth all degrade predictably and significantly under chronic sleep restriction. A person operating on insufficient sleep is not working at reduced capacity. They are working at a fraction of their potential while making decisions that create new problems that will require future hours to address. This is where most people stop. Because the response is almost always, "I do not have time for more sleep. I do not have time to sit in silence. I do not have time to exercise." And the answer is now familiar. You are not short on time. You are unclear about what the time is for. And if the time is for building something that compounds, then the maintenance of the instrument doing the building is not optional. It is the prerequisite. The truth is, the hours spent on mental and physical maintenance do not subtract from productive time. They multiply it. A person who sleeps adequately, moves regularly, and maintains periods of cognitive recovery does not get less done. They get more done, in less time, with higher quality, and with fewer errors requiring correction. The math always favors maintenance. Most people react. You choose. And the choice here is to stop treating mental fitness as something that happens after the work is done, and to start treating it as the condition that makes the work possible. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And no one is louder than the person running on empty, making reactive decisions, and calling the noise discipline. Emotional reactivity deserves its own examination here because it is the least discussed and most expensive mental habit in the domain of time. A person who responds to friction, conflict, or unexpected setbacks with prolonged emotional reaction is not simply having a bad moment. They are consuming hours. The anger lasts 3 hours after a difficult conversation. The anxiety that runs for an afternoon after an unclear email. The spiral of self-criticism that follows a single error. These are not small costs. They are massive time expenditures masquerading as feelings. The Stoic framework is useful here not as philosophy but as operational guidance. You do not control the event. You control the response to it. And the response is a choice, not always an easy one, but always a choice. A person who can observe an emotional trigger, acknowledge its presence, and choose a measured response rather than an automatic one is not suppressing emotion. They are managing the time cost. That is not coldness. That is precision. And precision in emotional response is one of the most powerful time ownership skills a person can develop. You now understand that the system you have built across these chapters runs on a substrate. That substrate is your mental state. It requires maintenance. It requires protection. It requires the same deliberate, structured attention you have given to your schedule, your environment, and your commitments. The system is complete. You have the architecture, sequencing, filters, environment, compounding framework, and mental discipline. What remains is the largest question of all. Not what to do in a single day. What to do with the accumulation of days. How to hold this practice across weeks, months, and years without losing the standard. Because a single well-owned day is an event. 1,000 of them is a life that cannot be undone. Chapter 9. The long game is built in days. Sit with this for a moment. Every person who has ever built something that outlasted a single season of effort built it the same way. Not through one monumental act of will. Not through a single breakthrough day where everything aligned perfectly and the output was extraordinary. Through the quiet, consistent, unremarkable repetition of owned days. One after another. In the presence of resistance. In the absence of motivation. In the middle of seasons where nothing felt like it was working. The long game is not built in years. It is built in days. Specifically, it is built into the daily decision of whether to hold the standard or release it. This chapter is the one most people skip in their thinking. They understand the system. They see the logic. They genuinely feel the pull toward a more intentional way of operating. And then they go looking for motivation to sustain it. They want the feeling that carried them through the first week to carry them through the first year. And when the feeling fades, as it always does, they conclude that the system was not for them. That they tried, and it did not last. They did not fail the system. They misunderstood what was supposed to be running it. Motivation is a feeling. Feelings are, by nature, temporary. They arrive, they peak, they recede. A system that depends on motivation to operate runs beautifully for 10 days and then stalls. Because the feeling that launched it is no longer at the same intensity. And without the intensity, the system looks optional. The system runs when the feeling does not. That is the fundamental shift that separates people who maintain high standards over the years from those who cycle through exceptional periods and crash back into old patterns. Not superior willpower. Not permanent motivation. A structural commitment that operates independently of how they feel on any given morning. This is what discipline actually is. Not the dramatic, teeth-gritted, white-knuckled resistance to comfort that most people picture when they hear the word. Discipline is the decision, made in a clear moment, that a certain standard will be maintained regardless of what the emotional weather looks like on any particular day. Most people react. You choose. And the deepest version of that statement is, you choose the standard you hold, and you hold it on the days you do not feel like it most of all. The truth is, the days you do not feel like it are the most important days. Not because suffering builds character in some vague inspirational sense. Because consistency is only real when it has been tested. A standard held on good days is a preference. Holding to a standard on difficult days is a discipline. And disciplines compound. Preferences do not. Here is the question that matters more than any other for assessing where you actually stand in this practice. Not what does your best day produce. What does your worst day still produce? That floor, the minimum standard you maintain even when energy is low, motivation is absent, and the environment is working against you, is your actual operating level. Not the peak. The floor. And it is the floor, held consistently, that determines the trajectory of the long game. Most people optimize for the ceiling. They design the perfect productive day and measure themselves against it. When they hit it, they feel accomplished. When they miss it, they feel like failures. This creates an inherently volatile emotional relationship with productivity, in which identity rises and falls with daily output, making the whole enterprise emotionally unsustainable. The better target is the floor. Ask not, what is the best I can do? Ask, what is the minimum standard I will hold no matter what? And then hold it. Without exception. without negotiation. Without giving yourself the kind of special dispensation today that becomes a permanent pattern by next week. This is where most people stop. Because defining the floor feels like settling. It feels like lowering the ambition. It is the opposite. Defining the floor is the act of deciding that a certain level of output is non-negotiable. It is the act of removing the possibility of zero from the equation. And a person who removes zero from the equation and produces something every single day, even minimally on the hardest days, will outperform the person who produces brilliantly sometimes and nothing on the difficult days. Every time. Over every meaningful timeline. The compound effect of time ownership is not visible in weeks. It is visible in years. But it is built in hours. Consider what 1 hour per day produces across a decade. Not a full day. 1 hour. 1 hour of deep compounding work, protected and executed with full focus, every single day. That is 3,650 hours across 10 years. Applied to any meaningful skill, any substantial project, any significant body of work, that volume of focused effort produces mastery. Not because the person was exceptionally talented. Because they showed up every day and held the standard. Now consider what happens when the daily commitment is not 1 hour but 3. The math becomes almost unfair. The person doing this does not look like they are doing anything remarkable from the outside. They are waking up. They are doing the work. They are protecting the hours and executing the priority, and then closing the day. Quietly. Without announcement. Without the performance of discipline that most people confuse with discipline itself. The truth is, the people who build the most are often the least visible in the act of building. Because the act of building does not look like anything from the outside. It looks like someone is sitting at a desk. Working. Undisturbed. Again. The way they were yesterday. The way they will be tomorrow. Most people react. You choose. And across the long game, the choice is never grand. It is always small. It is the choice made at the moment of resistance, the moment when releasing the standard would be easy, and no one would know. The choice to hold it anyway. Not dramatically. Quietly. Precisely. Because the standard was decided in advance, and that decision does not require renegotiation every morning. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And the long game is not won by the loudest person in the building. It is won by the person who is still doing the work when everyone else has moved on to talking about it. Here is what the accumulation of owned days looks like from the inside. Most of the time, it does not feel like progress. There is no visible momentum for long stretches. The work is being done. The standard is being held. And the results are not yet visible because compounding is invisible on a daily scale and only apparent on annual and multi-year scales. This is the period where most people stop. Not because it is not working. Because they cannot see that it is working. The feedback loop is too long for the impatience built into the modern mind. And so they conclude that the system is not producing results, and they abandon it, usually 3 months before it would have become undeniable. Hold the standard past the point where you can see the results. That is the entire instruction. The results are not waiting for you to feel ready. They are accumulating in the background of your consistent, quiet, unremarkable execution. They will surface. They always surface. But only for the people who did not need to see them first. You have built the system. You understand the architecture, the sequencing, the filters, the mental maintenance, and the long-game logic. You know what it takes. You know what it costs. You know what it produces. There is only one question left. Not how. Not when. Whether. Whether you are going to own this completely, without the comfort of excuses or the performance of intention. Whether you are going to close this audiobook and begin, or close it and think about beginning. That question does not have a philosophical answer. It has a behavioral one. Chapter 10. Own it or lose it. There is no middle. Here is the truth that every previous chapter has been building toward. Not gently, not gradually, but directly, because you are at the end, and the end is not the place for softness. You know more now than when this audiobook began. You understand the architecture of an owned day. You understand peak hours, compounding work, friction design, the cost of tolerance, and the necessity of the clear no. You understand mental maintenance, the long game, and the floor that must be held when motivation is absent. You have the complete framework, every layer of it, and none of it has changed your life yet. Because understanding and executing are two completely different acts. And the gap between them is where most people live permanently. Informed, articulate about the concepts, fluent in the language of the discipline and ownership, and still reacting. Still filling hours that were never theirs. Still busy. Still just loud. Understanding without execution is just entertainment. That is not a harsh statement. It is a precise one. And it is the final diagnosis this audiobook offers. Not on your schedule. Of your relationship with the knowledge you now have. Because information, without application, decays. It fades back into the noise. It becomes something you once listened to, something that felt important for a few hours, something that did not produce any observable change in how you actually spent your days. That outcome is available to you. It is the path of least resistance. The audiobook ends, the next thing begins, and the system you built inside your mind over these hours slowly dissolves back into an old pattern. It happens. Not to weak people. To smart people who respected the ideas but never closed the loop from understanding to behavior. Most people react. You choose. And the choice available to you right now, in this specific moment, is the most consequential small choice in this entire audiobook. Not the decision to redesign your whole life. The decision about what you do in the next hour. The truth is, the day has already started. Time is moving. Right now, as these final words land, the hours are passing. Not waiting for you to finish thinking about whether you are ready. Not pausing while you decide how you feel about commitment. Just moving. The way time always moves. Without your permission. Without your participation. Without caring at all whether you have ownership of it or not. This is where most people stop. At the edge of execution. With the plan clear, the reason solid, and the intention genuine. And some unnamed friction between knowing and doing, keeps them in the planning phase for one more day. Then another. Then another. Until the clarity fades and the noise returns, and the system that could have built something is sitting unused in a notebook or a mental archive somewhere, waiting for a better moment that never arrives. There is no better moment. There is only this one. Here is the final practice, and it is not a strategy. It is a declaration made daily in the first minutes of the day, before anything else has diluted it. One intention. Written. Specific. Not a list. The one thing that, if done today, moves the compounding work forward. Not what you want to feel at the end of the day. What do you want to have built? One protected block. The peak hours are closed to everything that does not belong in them. Phone removed. Inbox closed. Door shut, literally or figuratively. The conditions for deep work are established before the day has a chance to fill them with something else. One thing declined. Something that arrived today and was evaluated against the clarity of your direction and found to be a no. Not resentfully. Not apologetically. Cleanly. As evidence that the filter is operational and not merely theoretical. 1 hour of recovery, chosen and protected with the same seriousness as the work itself. Because the instrument requires maintenance. And the maintenance is not the reward for finishing. It is the condition for continuing. That is the daily declaration. For decisions made before the noise arrives. For choices that compound, quietly and without announcement, across every day they are made. That is not a complex system. Complexity is not the goal. Repeatability is the goal. A simple set of decisions, made consistently, by a person who has decided that their time belongs to them and behaves accordingly. Most people react. You choose. That phrase has run through this entire audiobook for a reason. Not as motivation. As a structural reminder of where agency actually lives. Not in the grand decisions. Not in the dramatic moments of commitment. In the ordinary, repeated, small choices that determine how each hour passes. Those choices, accumulated over days, weeks, and months, are the biography of a life. Not the choices made in the moments of high feeling. The choices made in the ordinary moments when no one is watching, and the standard could easily be released. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. You have heard that phrase enough times now to know what it means beyond its surface reading. It means that the performance of effort is not effort. The appearance of productivity is not productivity. That a life filled with noise and motion and response and reaction can be lived in its entirety without ever building the thing you were capable of building. And that the only protection against that outcome is ownership. Real ownership. The kind that shows up in how the first hour of the day is used, not in how it is discussed. The truth is, everything you built in this audiobook exists as potential right now. The architecture, the sequencing, the filters, the mental discipline, the long-game commitment. All of it is potential. None of it is real in your life yet. It becomes real only through execution. Through the decision made tomorrow morning to actually do the thing. And the morning after that. And the one after that. That stack of mornings is the whole answer. Here is the final challenge. Not a reflection prompt. Not a journaling exercise. A direct challenge to your next hour. Identify the one compounding task you have been postponing. Not the most urgent thing on the list. The most important one. The one that, every time it surfaces in your mind, you acknowledge and then push aside because the conditions are not quite right, or the timing is not perfect, or you need just a little more preparation before you begin. That task is your answer. That task is where ownership either begins or remains theoretical forever. Close everything else. Open nothing new. Do not check what arrived while you were listening to this. Do not make a plan to start tomorrow. Do not let the first act after this audiobook ends be a reactive one. Begin the task. Now. In this hour. With whatever you have available. Not perfectly. Not with full preparation. Begin. Because the day has already started. The hours are already moving. And somewhere right now, a person with your same 24 hours has already begun. Not because they are more ready. Not because the conditions are better. Because they decided. That is the whole book. That is the whole philosophy. What are you doing with this hour? You have heard everything now. Elon Musk gets 24 hours. You get 24 hours. The mathematics are equal. The results are not. And now you know precisely why. It is not talent. It is not accessible. It is not luck, circumstance, or the city you were born in. It is ownership. It is the decision, made before the noise begins, to take the day before the day takes you. Busy is not productive. Busy is just loud. And you have been loud long enough. Your peak hours are real. Your cognitive switching costs are real. Your tolerance of distraction is a choice. Your overcommitment is a clarity problem. Your overwhelm is a prioritization problem. Every single diagnosis in this audiobook has a prescription. You received it. Now the question is not whether you understood it. The question is whether you will do something about it in the next hour. Not tomorrow. Not Monday. This hour. Because this hour is already moving. Right now, as these words settle, someone with your same 24 hours is doing the thing you keep postponing. Not because they are more gifted. Because they decided. So here is your final challenge. Not a vague one. A precise one. Identify the one compounding task you have been avoiding. Open nothing else. Do not check. Do not scroll. Do not prepare to prepare. Go. Execute. Own the hour you are in. That is the whole book. That is the whole philosophy. Distilled to one moment. This moment. What are you doing with it?